A minimum maintainable item will then reflect on the asset label or asset ID, some people call them, to actually appropriate a single line item as a maintainable asset when it comes out of that BIM model and into their systems. So that these business rules and business processes needs to be very clear with industry and with the people actually inputting the information. You know, if they're unaware of these intricacies of business processes that uphold a single maintainable asset, then we don't get useful information that then could be beneficial for those maintainers. You might be counting 6 light poles instead of 1 when they have treated it as a single one.
Hi, Brian. Welcome to the Digital Construction Podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Andrea. I'm well, and thank you so much for having me today.
Brian Tay has had a fantastic career. At the moment, he works as a principal digital engineer at Arcadis, but he also worked at Arrow as a digital engineering lead in New South Wales in Australia. He has so much knowledge around BIM and asset management, and I'm so excited, Brian, to speak to you today so we can share all of your knowledge with our audience. So,
super excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So just to start, let's start with a couple of icebreakers, and then we can start talking about the serious stuff. But if you could take a road trip to anywhere in the world, where would you go, and what's your must-have travel snack?
I do love the cold. I do like to see snow. It's something that we don't really get here down in Australia, or especially over in Perth. So I would say a road trip. I would like to go somewhere cold and have a road trip up in the mountains to go skiing and what have you. And based on the travel snack, it's not a snack per se, but I would make sure I bring my coffee. I would have my coffee beans and my grinder to make sure I have my coffee on the go, because over in my family, I'm not allowed to drive until I have my first cup of coffee.
Nice. And it's probably something that keeps you warm if you are in the snow, and you need to make sure it doesn't freeze, otherwise you will have a gelato.
That's it. Well, you can then chuck it in ice cream as well when you're out there. Put some ice in it. Yeah, that's great.
That's nice. If we can have a nice coffee.
Yeah,
another icebreaker. If you could have any superpower to make a construction project go perfectly, it's very hard. Huh? What would it be? What type of superpower?
I think that's a tricky one. To make a construction project go perfectly, I would say being able to teleport or fly. Now, bear with me for a second. It's not about, I guess, there is so many places, especially when you want to get a project moving properly. I would say that being able to go in face to face and be able to travel quickly from back in the office and to site, to be able to help as many people along the journey, to help facilitate those projects is where I would say could be very, very useful.
It looks like you need a drone.
A drone, yeah. Well, an AI, so you can be, a robot, AI robot, so you can be in multiple places at once.
Nice. Yeah, thanks you for that. So for those who are not as familiar with your history and your career, can you start telling us a little bit more about your journey and all the process and how you become a digital engineer lead?
No, perfect. Yeah, no, that's long story short, I'd have to say I started my career in 2014, where I graduated from UWA. And during that period, as some may know, the mining wasn't doing too well. It was just after that boom, and it was on the downward trend. So I was looking for opportunities and started my career actually in Singapore, where I read a couple of articles where they were actually pumping a lot of infrastructure or money into infrastructure to do the underground train station, which at the point was the Thompson East Coast Line. So I started my career there as a structural engineer, and I was supporting the design and construction of 4 underground train stations at that time. From there, I moved over to Perth after working in Singapore. I moved over to Perth and worked on the Kwinana South Freeway. Worked there as a design structural engineer. And I designed the overhead cantilever gantries you see south of the river. Then I had moved over to Sydney, and that's where I really dive into the DE space. Throughout the whole process, I have been involved with a lot of the digital engineering components of it, that's per se, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Then I actually worked at Arup as a D lead for New South Wales before I decided to move into something a little bit more turbulent and exciting, a small design consultancy firm, which I worked with Digitized Consultant during that period. Then I made my way back home to Perth. Couldn't get enough of, had enough of Sydney and wanted to get back home where my family was. So now I work at Arcadis as a digital engineering manager and lead for Western Australia. I'm a chartered engineer by trade and officially moved in the digital engineering space for over 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like a very common career for those people that are in this space, like international career, where we found the best eggs in these companies like Arup and Arcadis, and we see what they can do in the digital space. And you're certainly one of those champions for the digital space in the construction industry. So I'm very excited to have this chat with you today. Can you share with us a couple of projects you've been working on in the past? I know that we know it's all about projects at the end of the day, when it's all about buildings and construction and projects. So can you share with us a couple of titles?
Yeah. So I touched on a few when I was giving that little introduction. So the ones in Singapore was Thompson East Coast Line. So those were the first few projects I dealt that actually started using BIM, and that was 4 underground train stations. That's where I got well involved in dealing with rule-based clash detection, utilizing Celebri. Then I actually moved on, so coordinating that design, coordinating that project over there. I moved over to Perth. That was when I worked on the Kwinana South Freeway. On top of being the structural designer on that project, I also dealt with parametric modeling. That's where I picked that up, where I connected the parametric models to not only the documentation, which at that point was Tekla, along with the actual structural design, which is GSA, the Arcadis structural analysis tool, if I remember that correctly. It's been a while. So then it had a perfect loop back into spreadsheets, which had all the calculations, and we worked out the optimization from there, and then reran those calculations that fed into those tools. Then I did a research project when I was over at Sydney as a consultant for Transport New South Wales, and that's where I dove into how IFC works under the hood, understanding the geometry definitions that were utilized by various different software providers, understanding the intricacies around the exporter and the importer, and understood and create a report for Transport New South Wales and their various stakeholders. I guess those are the significant projects in that space, and on top of that, I was the Transport New South Wales, the manager seconded to transport on projects such as M6, Stage 1, Great Eastern Highway, where we adapted and applied the D framework that was established from these mega projects. So holistically, that's where we're at. And I mean, Perth, there's a couple more projects like Metronet, BRE, but I think I'll leave it there as we go on.
It's a never ending list. Like, we know, like, I'm sure your CV will have a very, very long list of even like smaller projects that, if you compare with these big mega projects, sometimes it's very hard to share the full list. But thank you for sharing these ones.
No worries. Sometimes the small ones are the ones where you do the most meaningful work too. So let's not forget that.
That's true. Okay, so let's get into the main topic for today, which is BIM, digital and asset management. We all know that BIM is used during the design phase, during the coordination phase as well. But from your point of view, how can we use BIM beyond just design and coordination and to support the asset management?
So yes, I completely agree with you. Design construction is where majority of the time we are utilizing and engaging with the BIM aspect of documentation. But from my experience working with the asset owner organizations and mainly in the infrastructure space, I've had the opportunity to get a glimpse of what they actually utilize. Well, the information from the BIM to actually support their asset management processes. And look, they are maturing in this space at this point in time. But to support asset management, BIM has valuable information that could be utilized to then map and feed into the asset databases that asset owners have. But it's I guess from that perspective, it is also important to realize that, I mean, BIM has originated from the building space and how building asset owners are applying this term technology may be a little bit different from the infrastructure. So let me give you an overarching example. So let's say I'm an asset owner for multiple buildings, and I have maybe 5, 6, or maybe 10 different buildings in my portfolio. And BIM could be a virtual transferred, I guess, into a virtual representation of what that asset looks like. We go in, we maintain that asset and plug and play. We take out components, we maintain them, putting more information in there, or we even revamping new systems, taking old ones out and implementing a new HVAC system. While then you look at an example for the roads and highways aspect, you would have a multitude of highways, assets along the road. And it's a very different aspect because they are dealing with longitudinal assets, which chop and change a lot into the future. So those aspects is the important thing, where what exactly do they need from the outputs from the BIM models? That I guess that's where they can, I guess, use and support that asset management space, is the information within it. But in certain cases, certain different asset owners, they may use a little bit more, maybe the geometries as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's also very interesting to hear your point of view, your opinion, because sometimes, like, if you speak with one asset manager, they will have one point of view on how they specifically do that specific one thing. Like speaking with you, you had the opportunity to speak with multiple asset managers, to support them in different ways. So you had an opportunity to see how different people work in this space. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. From your point of view, what are the actual benefits from for asset managers if they actually decide to integrate BIM in their workflows? Because we know, like, the industry sometimes can be resistant. People are familiar with the things that they've done before. They want to keep on doing the same things over and over and over. Sometimes people are resistant to change, but there is real benefit. And also, to be fair, BIM is so flexible that sometimes could be challenging to understand how do you actually practically implement certain solutions. So from your point of view, what are the key benefits for asset owners?
I guess I would like to encourage us to kind of explore what is beneficial for the asset owners, and how they actually intend or could interact with these outputs through the BIM process. What information do they need, and how does that information stand to benefit their actual business processes? Now, let's say they are tracking a particular asset type, which would mean barriers, roads, curbs, and how do they actually interact with their work orders, their maintenance teams, to actually say, right, head down and actually go for the maintenance of these assets that I've listed within my register. And then how do I feed that information back into my system so that I can actually trace and maintain those assets with the information that we need? So understanding the process and business processes around how they maintain their assets we're able to get a little bit better understanding of how then do we connect it to our BIM workflows. So it's not a simple statement that we can integrate BIM to a certain degree, but let's think about how we can actually benefit from what is being developed for what is initially built for construction, what information is there that we can actually then transfer and connect to the asset maintenance space. So that being said, I would think of, handover of asset information, the classification, and actually tying it to their systems. How quickly and how easily can we say, right, you have these many assets that have been designed and then constructed, and how does that then integrate to their system so it can get into their business, their maintenance database, so they can then run their maintenance more effectively and not have assets that may sit outside of the database for years. Then you've got potential for forecasting maintenance costs. If you can tell what the asset type is, the benefit could be that they could ascertain what their potential maintenance costs could be into the future. So if they have capital expenditure of 6 mega projects that they are looking to try to build, have they correctly considered what that forecasted maintenance costs could be downstream, and whether they've budgeted that correctly. So I guess these are only two of the examples, and people may have many more, but hopefully from that you could see that certain information like the classification, the quantities, these could facilitate activities that asset managers could really benefit from.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. It's you're right. It's a case by case situation, because different teams may have different workflows or potentially use different software, and have different type of design, worked with different companies that have set up their BIM models in a different way. So yeah, it's a case by case scenario, but the opportunity is there, and yeah, people like you can help them understand how to actually solve these problems.
Exactly, and it will be different for different asset owners, how they use, what databases they use, how they actually interact with information, and how they actually classify what a maintainable asset is in their eyes.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so then shifting gear, now we're talking about the opportunities, but let's focus for 1 second on the challenges and the pain point. What's hard? So from your point of view, what are some of the challenges that companies face when they try to connect BIM to asset management workflows?
What are some of the challenges companies face? I think the biggest challenge is, again, and I reiterate, is understanding what truly the asset owners need. Is it a full-fledged, high-detailed BIM model output to facilitate their maintenance processes, or is it just simply a select few of information that we include in that workflow to then facilitate their maintenance processes and tracking of those assets? So I think the challenges faced is that asset owners don't really, and maintainers don't typically come to the party earlier on during the discussions when the projects are kicking off. They're always initially seen as at the end of the stage, just to hand over information. So appreciation of how asset maintainers use their information and maintain their assets, as I said before, the work orders, a good example would be to talk about the idea of their minimum maintainable item. Now, it's a terminology used over in New South Wales, but essentially, if you think about it, and I'll give you an example of a lighting pole. Lighting pole may be made of multiple components: the foundation, the pole, the light bulb, and maybe some other, the covers of the lighting pole. And I guess all those could be treated as a separate maintainable item, or do they actually treat that entire pole when they send out a work order as a single asset? Now, a minimum maintainable item will then reflect on the asset label or asset ID, some people call them, to actually appropriate a single light item as a maintainable asset when it comes out of that BIM model and into their systems. So that these business rules and business processes needs to be very clear with industry and with the people actually inputting the information. If they're unaware of these intricacies of business processes that uphold a single maintainable asset, then we don't get useful information that then could be beneficial for those maintainers. You might be counting 6 light poles instead of 1 when they have treated it as a single one. Another example would be the barrier. You may have multiple posts in a rail and multiple rails, but do they treat that start and end of a barrier as one maintainable item? These are the questions that we need to ascertain before we start inputting before we can derive and get valuable information for the asset owners. There's also challenges we face is stuff that they have within their system, their location references and asset references. So just to differentiate the referencing and classification, referencing may be an internal database system to allow them to locate their asset and locate their asset and also identify what the asset is. While the classification that we typically deal with within the BIM space talks about a breakdown of element, system, and product. And there may be alignment between these two, and that's what we seek for to ensure that the classification system not only benefits construction, but also asset maintainers. But business rules are established for these references, right? Let me think of a good example here. It could be that the location of a particular road, they may have road numbers, and then they also may have a linear reference whereby the road starts from 0 and goes to so many kilometers down the road. And where does the 0 start? Is it away from the city, to the city? And those little intricacies, before we can get valuable information within the models, needs to be fleshed out. And simply call asset references, they may call it KERB, a curb within their system. What is the equivalent in our classification space as well? So all this understanding of, the minimum maintainable item, which will then reflect as an asset label or asset ID, locations references, asset references, needs to be fleshed out together. And the asset owners like to encourage them to come to the party and actually share that knowledge in terms of their business rules to help alleviate some of these challenges.
Thank you, Brian. This is great.
I can't answer. I actually jumped ahead and really looked at how it could be solved, and that's me. I just jump into the problem solving.
No, that's okay. You're really bringing light to all of the challenges, some of the key challenges that asset managers can have, and that's why sometimes certain application of BIM in this space could feel overwhelming for certain people, because if you've never done this before, now you're confronted with this items and you're like, where should I start? But yeah, very good point. And speaking about where should I start, do you have any suggestions of how these challenges could be addressed or at least mitigated?
Yeah, as I kind of alluded already, I guess it's open and increase the transparency of how asset owners need their information. We from a design consultant space, we will always get full view of what construction companies need from the information we have in the BIM space. We would like to encourage the transparency with the asset owners. How do they maintain their assets? What is their MMI? What is their asset location references, or the location reference and asset referencing methodology? And the other thing would be a progressive and piecewise implementation. It is a lot to take in, I guess, from a practitioner's point of view, to apply the right properties and know how to validate it. That knowledge needs to be, I guess, ingrained within the business so that we are getting reliable information for those intended users. So progressive implementation will help with the piecewise change management process, and appropriate guide documents, training, and sharing that knowledge would go a long way. And then feedback and data validation. That is, I guess, a pivotal point in this space, is that we have that consistent way of verifying this data aligned with those business practices or the asset owner's business practices. So giving us that feedback will also then help us improve the validation processes and the way these the practitioners are implementing that information.
Yeah, I can see. I can see how you really need a team to support the asset management team to implement all these solutions. But I am conscious that certain projects may be confidential and you can't really share probably the most exciting things you've been working on. But is there any example projects that you can share with us where BIM has improved asset maintenance?
I think without saying any project, I guess where has BIM significantly improved asset maintenance? I think, as I said before, it's actually the standardized data that really enables, because a lot of the asset maintenance systems are database driven. Some of them are quite old in terms of like a CSV database. What really benefited some of them is the asset handover process, where that classification was mapped out right at the beginning. Those conversations were happened at an earlier stage, so that we were then able to identify quickly and apply the right asset labels and IDs onto the BIM models during design, to then correctly identify what assets were going to be constructed and eventually handed over to the asset owner. So the standardization of data and the completeness of it allowed asset owners to have a better view of their asset, along with other considerations where you would then, where those assets are, GPS information, and then plug it into their system for them to then start doing their business processes. So where is it improved? At the moment, I've seen it been more beneficial for the handover process. There has been inklings where they're looking at trying to do forecasting as well. Those are still, like as I said earlier, a progressive thing that they're looking to explore.
Yeah, very good. Thanks. Now, it will be very hard to have an episode about BIM asset management and don't mention digital twin. Like over the last few years, I have heard many definitions. People have different opinions, and it feels like it keeps on evolving. And everybody has a definition, and they have very strong opinion about what the definition should look like. So I want to take this opportunity to ask you, from your point of view, what is a digital twin, and probably what's the difference between BIM models and digital twin in asset management?
Right. A digital twin. I haven't really per se used that term myself, but my interpretation it is a virtual representation of the physical asset. Just keeping it simple, as some of you might connect with. I like to, I guess, give an analogy where the BIM is a appliance or a product, and digital twin is that product being plugged into the mains and power mains, and that product then becomes an ecosystem of appliances that is your home. And I guess that's my analogy for what digital twin is, and the electricity that's going into your products, appliances there, that's essentially the information, the data that is flowing from one appliance to another.
Oh, very good. Like, and in the industry, there are people that are very excited about digital twin. There are twins. There are people that are very skeptical about digital twins. But there are people skeptical about any technologies. Like there are people that are overexcited about any technologies. But from your point of view, do you think that digital twins could be the future of a BIM-driven asset management?
Well, I think the skeptics and what was the term you used? Skeptics and the
super excited, maybe. Yeah.
Super excited people, they're both right, because it's a case-by-case scenario. And the asset owner or asset organization needs to be able to work with that end appliance. If, let's say, we created a full BIM model with all the valuable information, can the asset organization utilize that product? does the digital representation have significant benefits? So, for example, if I am a resource client and I have offshore assets and major structures, that replica of that digital representation may be very, very beneficial when it comes to maintenance practices and activities before they go down from a safety perspective, visualize what it is. And having that replica can be very beneficial, but keeping in mind they still have to maintain that entire digital representation, because I mean, strictly speaking, is a visual representation of that physical asset, and over time, if that deteriorates and it's not kept up to date, then it loses its benefit. So how does an organization adopt that digital twin / BIM models into their business workflows? Now, the other question is, does the tools currently support what it takes to maintain that entire digital replica, a virtual replica of that model? Now, I'll give you an example with regards to, let's say, in an infrastructure space. The assets and the main biggest assets would be in the roads, the pavement. Now, with regards to that digital representation of the pavement, you have multiple layers. And the tricky thing with regards to, if the asset owner is to maintain that entire digital representation, what happens if you've got milled and resheets on certain lanes, you take out multiple pavement layers on others, and then you're extending the pavement to include another lane? You then start to see the complexity of trying to maintain that virtual asset. Are you going to hand the existing model to the designers to then chop and change so that they then have that full maintainable virtual representation? It gets really tricky. Can the softwares actually support that? And is it worth the investment? A lot of the linear asset management organizations are utilizing just a single line as their linear reference. That single line can easily be chopped and said this part was redone, multiple lanes, and then along that reference line you have all the various asset types, and you're not actually having a virtual representation per se in a 3D object space, but you do have a thread of where that road is from a location perspective, and along the road you can identify what assets they are. And if the pavement chops and changes, you're only changing data. You're not actually changing and having to maintain that exact virtual replica. So skeptics are right to say that, yes, technology at the moment probably still has advancement in that space, and whether we can do it efficiently such that it is a cost-effective way to maintain assets. And I think I like to be challenged. I like to see new technologies showcase how they actually are going to maintain that digital replica, but also what is that cost involved to actually maintain it, and is it really beneficial for that particular asset owner? So case by case scenario is my summary from all that.
Yeah, the answer is always it depends.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we know it's sure it's about technology. Sure, it's about BIM and all of the great things that we can do, digital twins. But at the end of the day, it's all about people. So how do we bring people along the journey, and how do we train and upskill the people? It's probably like crucial. So how do we, from your point of view, how do we train BIM teams? So on one side, how do we train the BIM teams to deliver and manage models that can be then used by asset managers? And then on the other side, how do we help the asset managers to then receive and take the most out of these models that have been produced with a goal in mind? And also, while we're here, do you see any difference between these models that are built for asset management versus model built for just construction, for the construction phase?
All right, we'll answer the first question first. It's a loaded question there. So how do we train BIM teams to deliver and manage models that can be used by asset managers? Firstly, I guess it's about understanding the information, appreciation how the asset owner need the information, how they use it, considerations of the asset and operation activities. So as I spoke about before, is how they classify the minimum maintainable item and how they're actually doing their work order activities, sending out for maintenance teams to go down and collect or do the repairs or collect information and put it back in their systems. So understanding that, we then have a way to translate that information into activities that these BIM teams will then have to apply as in the most easy way possible. So what I see and from that explanation is starting with the people, understanding what people need within the various asset organizations and owners, and then looking at the current business processes that are currently out there that they are actually doing. Then we reflect on, okay, if we are going to implement a new workflow and use technology such as and methodologies such as BIM, what are the updates to that current processes that is required? Once we go through that process, is who that updated process is going to impact people. We then train and work together with those stakeholders to make sure that process is understood and can be applied efficiently and effectively. And then we start picking the technology to say, right, these are the technologies that can deliver our process. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, how I would approach a project where we are looking at a new asset owner, we are looking at considerations around what they do. Think about the people first, then work out what the process need to be updated, and then let's then pick the technologies to make this work. I guess in some sense, we have been a victim of software marketing teams, and they're always pushing software onto us. Let's just reflect back and work out, okay, how is this going to benefit the people that we are utilizing and implementing a new process for? Is there any difference between traditional project delivery for construction? Definitely there will be. There will be updates to the processes. There will be updates to those workflows for the asset owners. But for construction, I would say hopefully not.
That should probably reflect the same asset, hopefully.
Well, that we can't assume that. Everyone has their own ways of working. There needs to be a common ground struck between them. But depending on what construction would need, maybe procurement, they might have a procurement idea or a reference to work out their cost to quantity takeoffs, etc. While that is a lot more granular, that may be compared to an asset owner. An asset owner may only need to know the entire traffic light, but a construction company, they need to know how much concrete is in the foundation, the pole, the steel that they're going to purchase. So the granularity shifts and changes, and I guess, is there any difference to traditional project delivery? Is taking on additional considerations. And this is where design is getting a little bit more complex, is understanding these various parties and what information, how they actually want it implemented. So I say there is a slight difference, but where we can find common ground, use the same information. If there is a classification system tying what construction companies require to those classification system, hopefully it's granular enough, potentially could serve a common purpose. You apply classification, construction, and asset owners may be able to then achieve what they need from mapping. So
yeah, a very good point. And now I know it's very hard to predict the future. Probably nobody really can predict the future, but if you focus on the roles and the people that work in this space, where do you see the BIM's roles in asset management can evolve over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? What's your best guess? We are going to reply this in 10 years from now.
Let me have that podcast in 10 years. I'll tell you. Let me look at my crystal ball here. I think as we get more mature with BIM. And more importantly, the digital engineering component, where you have a lot more information being produced, the assurance of the information that's being captured, about how asset owners interact with engineering information to manage their assets, then I think then the industry will be able to flex the application of BIM in a scalable way, sustainable way, which makes sure that the right amount of information gets to the right people, and in the right way at the right time. So I'd hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we are able to utilize the concept and of BIM a little bit more scalable to the needs of the people, rather than a copy and paste. This is what we're going to do for everything, every project moving forward, because that's the bee's knees. I think I would really hope that at 5 to 10 years, we are able to flex depending on who we are delivering projects to, and so forth.
Yeah,
So,
no, very good point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go, Andrew.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to sum it up as 5 to 10 years is a long time, and technology may have improved at that point as well. Hopefully, we as an industry will be able to adapt the newer technologies, but as it develops as well. But always considering how we actually implement it in a practical manner.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because at the moment we're dealing with data and large data sets and that lives in BIM models. And at the moment we have AI that is also emerging, and probably it's a relatively recent introduction into our workflows. So probably in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll probably be able to see in a little bit more in a clear way the direction that this is taking and how that can support us. But from this point of view, like expanding on this, what are the technological advancements that are most exciting in this space from your point of view?
From my point of view, on the topic of AI, I guess it really depends on what kind of data, like an AI model that is at the back of it. I think us as engineers want to have assurance that what we are putting out there, what we are designing, is assured, reliable, and no matter what, it still will need to be fact checked and reviewed. So if there is technical advancements that are going to be embedded within a typical design process or even the BIM modeling process, we need to do it in an assured manner and assured way, because there is inherent risk with the data that we are delivering. If let's say we say that there is a gas main, there isn't a gas main in this location, and we dig it and something does happen, there is a significant risk in the information. So the assurance will never be, the assurance will always be there, and in one way or another. So it's not about it taking over, but how do we then update our business processes to align what we currently do, or the people that are working on the project with those tools. But what are some of the technological advancements that I see? Predictive analysis through data analytics. So that comes through the utilization of structured and assured and validated data. If we have, a database associated with the asset types, the condition of it currently, whether it be temperature of that location over the years, all that sort of information, or typical amount of investment, all that data can then be input into a predictive analysis to work out, what's the best course of action for a maintainer to invest in, whether they should maintain this set of items before another. I think once we start to get a more structured set of data, even in terms of AI, the data models will be a lot more trustworthy, and it will be probably easier for an engineer to go hand on heart and I will trust what that does come out of there. So there is a bit of progress in that space to really open the doors to what could be. Compared to the AI models with regards to ChatGPT and language, we know that makes mistakes. We can't have mistakes in the engineering space, in the engineering information. That is being used for construction, being used to maintain assets, etc. So that's one item. But as industry progresses with new technologies, I think we need the right kind of people who can make sure we reflect on the impact of these new technologies. We need the right people to work together with, the QSs, the designers, the asset owners, and understand what they need and how existing business processes can then be updated and evolved so that we can then implement these technology in a more effective manner. So a great idea in this space is only as good as its execution. So
very good point. That's a very, very wise statement. Thank you for that.
You flatter me.
And with that, we are at the end of our episode. Thank you, Bryan, for taking the time to speak with me today and sharing your knowledge with the listener. Just if people want to reach out to you, where they can find you?
Oh, so you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to me there. It's on my phone. I will respond as soon as I get to.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bryan. Have a great day.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea. It was great.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya.